So what did Shakespeare learn in that schoolroom just round the corner from his home? Well, the answer is grammar, Latin grammar. That was why it was called a grammar school. And the book from which he learnt it was Lilly's Grammar. I'm holding it in my hand. William Lilly was commissioned early in the 16th century to produce a grammar book that would be studied in schools throughout the country. And it was reprinted more times than pretty well any other book apart from the Bible. Every boy who went to school would have got their Latin from Lilly. It came in two parts. First of all, there was an introduction to the 8 parts of speech, nouns and verbs, adjectives and adverbs. So this gave the pupils the basis of grammar, of how to put sentences together. And of course in Latin it was much more difficult than in English, because Latin is a language that has different declensions. So I, me, you go ego, mihi, me, tu, nos, vos, and the verbs, whereas an English verb, apart from having an s in the plural, is more or less the same in singular and plural, a Latin verb constantly changes. There's a different ending for the I, the you, the he. Amo, amas, amat, amamus, amatis, amant, the boys would have gone. And there were different conjugations, as they were called. Some verbs ending in O, and some in E, and some in I, and each of them was declined or conjugated differently. So there was an immense amount to learn. And the teaching was done through rote learning, an endless process, from 8 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night, having the Latin grammar drummed into you. Once the boys had learnt the 8 parts of speech, they moved on to the second part of Lilly's grammar, the so-called Brevissima Institutio Curatio Grammatices Cognoscendae, the art of learning grammar in detail. And this began to give Shakespeare his first glimpse of poetry, because the way that Lilly taught the more advanced forms of grammar was through quotations, through examples from the great poets of ancient Rome. So we can imagine Shakespeare in that schoolroom actually reading verse for the first time. And one of the things that Lilly particularly emphasises are figures of speech, elaborate ways of making poetic language memorable. The figures such as metaphor, synecdoche, the arts of imagery, of elaborate composition. These are things that Shakespeare and his fellow pupils would have learned. So how is this reflected in the plays? Well, there is no play more than Merry Wives of Windsor that shows us a glimpse, that opens a window into the world of the young Shakespeare. Because in that play there is a scene that takes the form of a Latin lesson. The teacher is a Welshman called Hugh Evans, and it's perhaps not a coincidence that one of the teachers in the Stratford Grammar School in Shakespeare's time was a Welshman. And the pupil is called William. If ever there's a moment when Shakespeare puts himself into his plays, it must be this one. The sequence begins with the mother, Mistress Page, saying to Hugh Evans that her husband has said that her son, William, is not learning anything from his books. And she asks Evans to ask him some questions in what she calls his accidents. Accidents and syntax were the 2 elements of Lilly's grammar. So the boy comes forward and Evans starts asking him questions. I'm not going to try and do the Welsh accent. William, how many numbers is in nouns? 2. Mistress Quickly, who's the hostess of the tavern in the play, intervenes at this point, and she constantly misunderstands what's going on. Potentially a Latin lesson is a rather boring subject for a theatrical scene, but by having the comic interventions and misunderstandings of Mistress Quickly, Shakespeare makes it into great comedy. Truly, says Quickly, I thought there had been one number more, because they say odds nouns. Peace, says Evans. What is fair, William? Pulka. Polecats, says Mistress Quickly, mishearing it. There are fairer things than polecats, surely. Evans again shuts her up. I pray you, peace, woman. What is lapis, William? He says. A stone. And what is a stone, William? A pebble. No, says the teacher, it is lapis. I pray you, remember in your praying. Lapis. That is a good William. What is he, William, that does lend articles? Articles are borrowed of the pronoun and be thus declined. Singulariter nominativo hic haec hoc. Nominativo hig hag hog, mark you. Genitivo huius. And so it goes on. Now, what's happening here? The schoolteacher says, what is lapis? And the boy correctly replies, a stone. Stone, English word, lapis, Latin word. And then he says, what is a stone? And at that point the boy thinks, well, what's a stone? A stone's like a pebble, a pebble. And the teacher replies, no, it is lapis. Because the way in which they learnt was constant repetition. Latin word, English word, Latin word. Lapis, stone, stone, lapis, lapis, stone. That's the vocabulary, and then you go on to the parts of speech. That complicated thing in Latin of having to learn all the different endings for singular and plural and nominative and accusative and genitive. It's a scene that absolutely smacks of a memory of being in the classroom in Stratford-upon-Avon. And the fact that he turns it into comedy by having Mistress Quickly's comic interventions suggests that he was a little bit bored learning all that grammar. However, it did have its advantages, because it meant when he came to the upper forms, he was prepared for something much more interesting and exciting.